It is July 21st, 1798. Under the intense heat of the Egyptian desert, Napoleon Bonaparte gazes at the distant pyramids. Before him, thousands of Mamluk horsemen advance in a cloud of dust. The French formations in tight squares stand ready for the impact. The clash of scimitars against bayonets fills the air, accompanied by the crack of musket fire. Amidst the chaos, Napoleon shouts to his troops, "Hold the formation." It is a test of strength and discipline in a land where the fate of empires is decided. This is the Battle of the Pyramids, a clash that will forever shape the history of the East and of Napoleon. Iron Legacy, where history lives. It was July 21st, 1798, and the scorching sands of the Egyptian desert shimmered under the sun's heat. Napoleon Bonaparte, alongside his generals, gazed toward the horizon, where the majestic pyramids of Giza stood tall. In front of him, the 25,000-strong French army was assembled, ready for battle against the Mamluks. "Destiny has brought us here," Napoleon told his officers. "From the top of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you." He aimed to inspire his troops, who were exhausted after days of marching under a relentless sun. The soldiers knew that this was no ordinary battle. It was a clash of civilizations and a chance to make history. The landscape was vast and desolate. The open desert offered few elevations, except for the Nile to the right of the French lines and the pyramids in the distance to the left. The sandy, dry terrain made rapid advances challenging for either side. This geography favored Napoleon's tactics, allowing for an effective defense against Mamluk cavalry charges. Napoleon knew he was facing a large but less disciplined enemy. The Mamluks, led by Murad Bey, were determined to drive the French out. They formed an extended line of horsemen, armed with swords and spears, waiting for the right moment to attack. Napoleon, in turn, positioned his troops in square formation, each composed of 5,000 to 6,000 men, creating 4 large, interconnected squares, surrounded by bayonets, with cannons positioned at the corners to provide supporting fire. The tension was palpable, and the air seemed heavier as the Mamluks began their advance. Napoleon turned to General de Sykes and said, "The key is discipline. They are swift, but we are strong. We will maintain the formations and wear them down." The confrontation was about to begin, and the general knew that success depended on his troops' ability to hold their formation under pressure. Heat, dust, and uncertainty hung over the battlefield as the two armies braced for the inevitable clash. By the end of the 18th century, the French Revolution had turned Europe into a battleground of ideologies and military conflicts. With European monarchies fearing the spread of revolutionary ideals, the Second Coalition was formed, an alliance of powers determined to defeat France and restore the balance of power on the continent. At the center of this turbulence stood Napoleon Bonaparte, the young general who had become a national hero after his victories in Italy. Ambitious and eager for more glory, Napoleon saw Egypt as a strategic and political opportunity. He understood that severing the British route to India would not only weaken the British Empire, but also establish France as a global power in the Middle East. Moreover, Egypt was a land full of mysteries and cultural riches. Aware of the symbolic value of conquering the land of the pyramids, Napoleon brought with him not only soldiers, but also a team of scholars, engineers, and scientists, the famous Commission of Sciences and Arts. He intended not only to subdue the territory militarily, but also to explore its archaeological secrets and integrate them into French glory. Shortly after landing in Alexandria in July 1798, Napoleon realized that the campaign would be more challenging than anticipated. Logistics were complicated, with limited supplies and a hostile climate, increasing the tension among the troops. Nevertheless, Napoleon remained focused on his strategic objectives: to march swiftly toward Cairo, defeat the Mamluks, and establish a strong base of operations. As they advanced through the desert, Napoleon addressed his soldiers with a motivating speech. "Soldiers, you are not merely marching to conquer lands. You are walking toward eternity. Each step in the desert is a step toward the glory our republic deserves." This blend of strategic appeal and promise of a historical legacy was crucial in maintaining troop morale and solidifying Napoleon's command at the start of the campaign. On July 1, 1798, the French army landed in Alexandria under a suffocating heat. The port, a fortified coastal city, was the first sight Napoleon's soldiers had of Egyptian soil. As they marched inland, the French encountered an arid and inhospitable terrain, made up of sand dunes, uneven ground, and scarce sources of drinkable water. The advance toward Cairo was not easy. The extreme climate caused a series of problems, ranging from dehydration to physical exhaustion. Soldiers who were accustomed to battles in Europe found themselves challenged by the scorching desert. During one halt, an officer remarked to Napoleon, "General, marching here is like fighting an invisible enemy." Napoleon replied confidently, "The desert may be treacherous, but it is merely another obstacle on our path to glory." In addition to the harsh climate, logistics were a constant challenge. The transport of supplies was slow, and many soldiers had to carry their own provisions. Napoleon ordered scouting parties to move ahead and locate nearby villages in search of water and food. However, most villages were either under Mamluk control or deserted, making resupply even more difficult. Tactically, Napoleon was aware that the flat, open terrain favored the Mamluk cavalry, renowned for their swift charges. To counter this, he intensified his troops' training in the square formation, a defensive structure that would be crucial in the impending confrontation. During a stop by an oasis, he gathered his officers and said, "Gentlemen, the key to victory here is not just brute force, but discipline. The Mamluks rely on speed, we rely on order." As they approached Giza, the soldiers began to see the pyramids in the distance. For many, it was their first glimpse of these stone giants. The monumental sight, combined with the anticipation of a decisive clash, created an atmosphere of tension and excitement. Sensing the psychological impact of the setting, Napoleon emphasized the historical importance of the moment. "We stand on the threshold of something great. This ancient land will be the stage of our victory, and its pyramids will bear witness to French glory." As the army prepared for battle, Murad Bey's troops also made their move. The Mamluks chose the terrain near the Nile, where they could exploit their superiority in cavalry, confident they could annihilate the invaders. The decisive battle was about to begin. It was the dawn of July 21st, 1798. Knowing that the confrontation was imminent, Napoleon rose early to survey the battlefield. The landscape was vast and flat, with the pyramids to the left and the Nile River to the right of the French troops. The sandy terrain, with few elevations or obstacles, favored the mobility of the Mamluk cavalry, but also allowed the French artillery to have more effective range. Napoleon divided his forces into 5 large squares, each consisting of about 5,000 infantrymen. The formations were designed to withstand the swift and aggressive charge of the enemy cavalry. Within the squares were the musketeers with bayonets pointed outward, while light cannons were positioned at the corners and in the central areas for support. The orders were clear: maintain the formation at all costs, absorb the initial impact, and counterattack with concentrated musket and artillery fire. Before the battle began, Napoleon gathered his officers for final instructions. "Gentlemen, the key to victory today will be the discipline of our troops. We must not be swayed by the momentum of the Mamluk charges. They will try to surround us and break us, but our squares are unbreakable. If we hold our positions, we will win." On the other side, Murad Bey organized his 6,000 Mamluk horsemen in a broad, flexible line, aiming to attack the flanks and break through the French defensive formation. He was confident that the speed and ferocity of his men would be enough to destroy the French army. The Mamluks were seasoned warriors, masters of swift maneuvers, and their heavy cavalry was composed of men armed with scimitars, spears, and shields, ready for direct battle. As the sun rose and the heat intensified, the first wave of Mamluk horsemen began their charge. They advanced rapidly, raising a cloud of dust that engulfed the battlefield. The sight was intimidating, but the French remained calm. "Hold your positions," shouted General Desai, as the French soldiers braced for impact. The French cannons opened fire, creating a barrage that inflicted heavy casualties on the Mamluk ranks before they even reached the bayonet line. However, the surviving horsemen continued their advance, determined to breach the French lines. The first strikes of the scimitars clashed against the shields and bayonets of the frontline soldiers, but the squares held firm. Observing the battle from an elevated position, Napoleon saw an opportunity to destabilize the enemy. He ordered a group of sharpshooters to advance through the gaps between the squares, targeting the cavalry attempting to encircle the formations. This reduced pressure on the French flanks and hindered the Mamluks' attempts to surround them. The battle was only just beginning, and both sides knew that the outcome would depend on their ability to maintain cohesion and courage amidst the chaos. The Battle of the Pyramids was in full swing. As the Mamluk charges continued, the French squares were under increasing pressure. The sound of scimitars clashing against bayonets, the crack of muskets, and the roar of artillery blended into a deafening chaos. The sandy ground, already trampled by horses and soldiers, was covered in dust and fallen bodies. Despite the intensity of the attacks, the French maintained cohesive formations. Napoleon's tactic of forming defensive squares was working as planned. When a group of Mamluk horsemen tried to breach the front line, the front ranks lowered their bayonets, while the inner ranks fired their muskets, creating a deadly barrier. "Do not retreat," shouted General Kleber to his men. "This is our moment." Seeing that the frontal assaults were being repelled, Murad Bey ordered his cavalry to temporarily retreat and regroup for a coordinated flank attack. He hoped that a broader lateral strike could break the French formations. With his cavalry split into smaller groups, they attempted to encircle the more isolated French squares, advancing rapidly to catch the French by surprise. Napoleon, however, anticipated Murad Bey's maneuver. Noticing the enemy's movements, he ordered the field artillery to adjust their fire toward the flanks, creating a new line of fire that caught the Mamluk horsemen off guard. The repositioned cannons inflicted heavy casualties and thwarted the planned encirclement. Napoleon turned to his officers and said, "They are brave, but we are more disciplined. Hold the formation, and they will have no chance." The impact of the artillery was devastating. The Mamluk flank charge began to lose momentum as cannon and musket fire created a deadly crossfire. Realizing that the encirclement was failing, Murad Bey personally led one final charge at the center of the French lines, attempting to break through. Sword in hand, he advanced alongside his most seasoned men, hoping to inspire a last-ditch effort. The French troops, however, were ready. As the horsemen approached, the musketeers unleashed coordinated fire, followed by a bayonet charge that forced the Mamluks to retreat. Murad Bey, seeing that the battle was lost, ordered a strategic withdrawal to the Nile, hoping to save what remained of his forces. Many horsemen, desperate, tried to cross the river but drowned under the weight of their armor. As the dust settled and the sounds of battle faded, it became clear that the victory was French. Napoleon, still on the battlefield, looked at his troops and said, "Soldiers, you have proven yourselves the true heirs of Rome and France. Glory is ours, and the world will witness what we have achieved today." The French army had suffered significant losses, but its superior organization and defensive tactics secured victory. The Battle of the Pyramids solidified Napoleon's control over Cairo and marked one of the most decisive moments of his career, transforming him into a living legend in the East. With the decisive victory at the Battle of the Pyramids, Napoleon and his troops marched triumphantly toward Cairo. The Mamluks were in disorganized retreat, leaving the city vulnerable to the French advance. For Napoleon, seizing control of Cairo was not just a military victory, but a crucial strategic move to establish a solid base in Egypt. Upon entering the city, Napoleon adopted a strategic political approach. He initially sought to win the trust of local leaders, convening a meeting with the main sheikhs and members of the Muslim elite. Gathered in a traditional hall, Napoleon addressed them with a calculated speech. "I do not come as an enemy of Islam, but as its liberator. I will respect your traditions and make Egypt an example of prosperity under the French flag." To reinforce his image as a benevolent leader, Napoleon established the Divan of Cairo, a council made up of local notables who, in theory, would participate in the administration of Egypt. Although this measure was largely symbolic, it served to present the French occupation as a civilizing mission rather than a mere invasion. Simultaneously, he ordered his troops to respect mosques and other religious institutions, aiming to avoid major conflicts with the Muslim population. However, the occupation of Cairo was not entirely peaceful. Napoleon soon faced pockets of local resistance, particularly from remnants of the Mamluk forces that continued to operate in the rural areas and around the Nile Delta. Additionally, the population of Cairo remained wary, with sporadic episodes of resistance emerging during the initial days of occupation. Determined to maintain order, Napoleon did not hesitate to use force when necessary, swiftly suppressing any attempts at rebellion. Beyond internal challenges, a greater problem loomed. The defeat of the French fleet at the Battle of Abu Qir Bay in August 1798 by British Admiral Horatio Nelson. This naval defeat dealt a significant blow to Napoleon, isolating his forces on Egyptian soil and cutting the main supply line to France. "We are alone now," Napoleon told his officers upon receiving the news. "But Egypt is ours, and we will make this desert the cradle of a new empire." The victory at the Battle of the Pyramids had secured control of Cairo, but the difficulties were just beginning. The French occupation of Egypt would become increasingly challenging over time, as Napoleon sought to balance his imperial ambitions with the complexities of governing a foreign and hostile territory. The Battle of the Pyramids not only marked a military victory, but also had significant strategic and political implications. For Napoleon, the conquest of Cairo was a statement of his ability to project French power beyond Europe, challenging British dominance in the Mediterranean. However, the victory also brought new challenges and unforeseen complications for the French army in Egypt. Isolated after the naval defeat at Abu Qir Bay, the French army was cut off from direct communication and constant supplies from France. Napoleon, however, was undeterred. He sought to turn Egypt into a permanent base of operations, with plans to expand into Syria and possibly beyond. He believed that the campaign could be the beginning of a French empire in the Middle East, a vision he shared with his closest officers. "The East is the future of France. If we succeed here, we can change the course of history." Meanwhile, in France, the Egyptian campaign and the victory at the Battle of the Pyramids were widely glorified by revolutionary propaganda. The French press portrayed Napoleon as a new Alexander, a military hero bringing French civilization to exotic lands. Napoleon's rhetoric of liberating Egypt from the Mamluks and bringing progress to the banks of the Nile captured the public imagination, bolstering his popularity and strengthening his political position. However, the reality in Egypt was more complex than the propaganda suggested. French rule faced continuous resistance, especially in rural areas where local leaders refused to accept Napoleon's authority. Additionally, the French soldiers began to suffer from the harsh climate, disease, and supply shortages. The troops' morale was gradually eroded by the difficult living conditions, and rumors of a possible return to France began circulating among the soldiers. Aware of the fragile situation, Napoleon intensified his efforts to present French rule as beneficial to Egypt. He ordered the construction of infrastructure, such as irrigation canals and roads, and promoted archaeological studies that revealed the country's cultural wealth. "Show the people that we came to build, not to destroy," he told his administrators. However, the campaign began to lose its initial luster. Napoleon's plans to extend the French presence beyond Egypt were thwarted by a lack of resources and the growing British involvement in the region. The failure of the invasion of Syria in 1799 was a severe setback to Napoleon's ambitions in the Middle East. Despite these difficulties, the Battle of the Pyramids remained a symbol of his skill as a commander and strategist, helping to cement his legend as one of the greatest conquerors of the modern era. It also served as a stepping stone to his eventual rise to power as first consul, paving the way for the Napoleonic era in Europe. The Egyptian campaign, and in particular the Battle of the Pyramids, left a complex legacy that extended beyond the battlefields. Although Napoleon failed to create a lasting empire in the Middle East, the impact of his campaign was felt in both France and Egypt. In France, the victory at the Battle of the Pyramids became a symbol of military glory and one of the most celebrated episodes of Napoleon's career. The initial success of the campaign reinforced Napoleon's image as a fearless military leader, capable of challenging established powers and conquering distant territories. This perception was decisive for his political rise in 1799, when he returned to France and quickly assumed power as first consul. The legend of Napoleon as a new Alexander continued to shape French politics and culture, fueling the imperial spirit that characterized the early 19th century. In Egypt, the legacy was equally significant, though more ambivalent. The campaign brought with it a team of French scholars, whose discoveries helped to lay the foundation for modern Egyptology. The famous Rosetta Stone, discovered during the campaign, was one of the most important milestones, allowing scholars to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs and opening new windows into the understanding of ancient Egyptian civilization. On the other hand, French rule brought violence, repression, and exploitation, leaving a mixed memory among Egyptians. The occupation was marked by attempts at social and economic control that were never fully realized, resulting in sporadic revolts and continued resistance. Napoleon was forced to leave Egypt in 1799 when the military and political situation in Europe demanded his return, and his troops were eventually defeated by the British and the Ottomans in 1801. Despite the long-term failures, the Battle of the Pyramids remained a milestone in military history, representing the pinnacle of Napoleon's strategic thinking and his innovative use of defensive formations on the battlefield. It also marked an era of direct confrontations between European powers and territories in the Middle East, foreshadowing 19th century imperialism. For Napoleon, the Egyptian campaign was a mix of success and failure, but above all, it was a testament to his boundless ambition. As he would later reflect, Egypt was the beginning of everything. Not just my career, but my vision of empire. The Battle of the Pyramids, with its 40 centuries of history watching from above, cemented Napoleon not only as a military commander but as a visionary leader whose impact would be felt for generations. Before we wrap up, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss upcoming episodes about Napoleon's campaigns and other key events in ancient history. Your subscription is essential to keep this project alive and continue exploring the legacy of the great leaders of the past together.